So in this lesson, we're going to talk about signs of trig functions. We want to know what the signs for sine of 885 are, cosine of 885, tangent of 885. This would be really straightforward if we could use a calculator. We would just plug this into a calculator, see if it's positive or negative, and then there you go. But the idea is not to do that. Is there any way for us to figure out what the signs of these would be? Not the exact values, just would it be positive, would it be negative? Yes. And the way we're going to go about doing this is we need to figure out some quadrants to this thing. So a quadrant is everything, actually. So 855 degrees, first thing is, where is 885 degrees? Well, 885 degrees, let's talk about some coterminal angles to this thing. So rather than drawing a graph and spinning around a whole bunch of times, let's see if we can simplify this. And by simplifying it, I want to take away some of the swirls and find coterminal angles. So if I take 855 and I cut a 360 out of that, that's going to leave me at a 495. And then if I take another 360 out of that, that's going to leave me with a 135. So 135 degrees I can make way more sense out of. So if I draw that, 135 degrees is going to be sitting kind of somewhere in the second quadrant. Now if I did 885, I would have just gone twice around. So once, twice, that would have been 720 plus the 135 would have got me to the 885. But why go around a whole bunch of times when you're going to get the same result by wiping out some circles? So how does that help us to figure out the signs for this? Well, it goes back to the fact that sine of any angle actually refers to a y value, because you're taking it and putting it into some sort of an algebraic thing where it's not a geometry thing. Sines can, we're going to have positives and negatives out of this, and it's because we're associating sine with a y value. And cosine is equal to x, and tangent is equal to y divided by x. Now we don't need to know the specifics, but we just need to know the signs of them. So how I go about doing this is this. A smart trig class. This organizes my signs. And so here's how I go about doing this. Let me complicate it for a second to kind of give too much information. And then we're going to simplify it and talk about what this is. So you have sine, cosine, and tangent in each quadrant. Sine, cosine, tangent in each quadrant. So if we're talking about sines are y's, cosines are x's, and tangents are y's divided by x's, we can figure out what the signs of all of these are in each of the quadrants. So sines are y values, so we're looking at positive y values in the first quadrant. Cosines are x values, they're positive. Tangent are these two divided into each other, they're positive. Sine is positive because you're up, you're in the second quadrant, your y values are positive. Cosines are x's, so you're negative. And tangent are these two divided into each other, so that's going to be a negative. Sine, on the third quadrant, your y values are negative, your x values are negative, and tangent is these two things divided into each other, which will be positive. Sine in this quadrant is negative because your y values, positive because your x values, and then them dividing into each other is negative. So in this quadrant, all of them are positive. In this quadrant, sine is positive. In this quadrant, tangent is positive. In this quadrant, cosine is positive. That's what this refers to. This refers to all of your positives in those quadrants. So all your trig functions are positive in the first. Sine is your only positive in the second. Tangent is your only positive in the third. And cosine is your only positive in the fourth. So I can take that information, and once I draw this picture and I knew that I was sitting in that quadrant, I would have drawn that picture potentially next to it or on top of it and go, well, sine's my only positive in that quadrant. A smart trig class. So S is my only thing. So I'm looking at sine of that is a positive, cosine's negative, tangent's negative. Now, I wasn't asking for the specifics. We were just looking for, can you figure out what the signs are? Yep. And this is a very, very nice, handy tool. Kind of organizes it. So the acronym that I've heard over the years is a smart trig class. Use whatever you like, but it works great. So if we look at a different kind of question, it's still going to relate to some signs, but this one's a little bit different of, could they give you information and you figure out what the quadrant is that they're talking about? So I'm going to be kind of still basing it off of this, a smart trig class. So if they're telling you that sine of some angle is going to be, your output to that is going to be greater than 0, aka positive, that narrows you down into the first and the second. All right, and if cosecant is also positive, then that still leaves you into the first and second, because cosecant is really sine. So if sine is positive, cosecant has to be positive. And so we are narrowed down to the first and the second quadrant. All right, so what if you were given tangent of some angle was less than 0 and cosine of some angle was also less than 0. So let's figure out where you might be here. So cosine being less than 0, tangent being less than 0. Tangent's positive here and positive here, so it would be negative in these two quadrants. But cosine needs to be negative as well. That's in this quadrant, because sine is where is your positive in that quadrant. So tangent and cosine would be negative in that quadrant, so the only possibility would be quadrant 2. And let's do one more. So what if you have secant of an angle is greater than 0 and cosecant of an angle is less than 0. So how do we deal with that? Secant is greater than 0, which really is the same idea that cosine is greater than 0. So cosine being greater than 0 are going to be in these two. Cosine's positive in these two. And then cosecant, which is essentially sine. Sine is a negative. Well, sine's positive in this one, negative in this one. So you're looking at the fourth quadrant. And that is your answer. All right, and that was involving signs of your trig functions.